have been hearing a lot about the Rohingya genocide and the crisis that has been going on, and here also we have been getting more information about the justice issues as well. So I would request our speaker for the second session, Mr. Patrick Burgess, who is an Australian lawyer and also is president of AJAR Justice and Rights, AJAR. And he has been a very good friend of Liberation War Museum for a very long time. And we have been involved in different activities in the Rohingya makeshift camps. So he's going to deal with the issue of international legal options for addressing the Rohingya genocide, ICJ, ICC, and the IIMM. So we would be hearing from the speaker about the legal mechanisms to deal with the genocide against the Rohingyas and what are the future possibilities to bring justice to this community. So without any further ado, I would request Patrick to start his lecture. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, good. I'm going to just speak to you today. I'm not going to use the PowerPoint, but I will send you some notes explaining, just setting out in basic, simple terms what I'm going to say to you now. I wanted to just speak to you because I think when we look at the Rohingya, we have to understand the story behind them and also the story of international law and our struggle for justice. Very often, mass crimes are committed by the leaders of a country, and they are the ones who control, in the case of Myanmar, the military, the government. Also, the courts, to various degrees, are not independent. So the chances of justice inside a country where the leadership have been involved are very small. And this was the reason why, and I know you've been studying transitional justice and you're now experts, all of you, which is wonderful. We know and we remember back to the experience of the Germans and the Jews in the Second World War, when it was Germany's policy to wipe out the Jews. And the international community, after that experience, has increasingly looked for solutions. What do you do when the leadership of a country is involved in attacking its own people? And in the case of the German experience and Second World War and the other atrocities, we established the United Nations, and we began to increasingly recognize that some crimes are so important that the country itself can't just be the only one controlling it. So gradually, international law has come to realize and accept that crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, and some other gross violations of human rights are international crimes. They are our concern, no matter where they're committed. They have universal jurisdiction. They are illegal acts wherever they are committed. And it doesn't matter if a government says that's legal, what they're doing, they are still crimes against international law. So let's see how this applies to the Rohingya. Now, the Rohingya issue is a very complicated one, and I don't have time to go into all of the historical issues around it, and perhaps you also know them. But the issue, one of the core issues, is whether the Rohingya people have the right to citizenship in Myanmar, and are they original ethnic groups of Myanmar? This is a core problem for them, and the historical reasons, both sides of that argument have their arguments. One side says that Rohingya were in Myanmar from the 7th or 8th century, and certainly in the early part of the British Empire, the migration into Myanmar largely a lot from Bangladesh, was the largest migration in, I think, 1824 in the entire 1827, when the British had already been there, in the entire world. The New York migration was second. So a lot of people came in. Some had already been there. It's unclear, and I think it's mixed, the background and historical rationale for their right to citizenship. But many in Myanmar, including the military, have failed to accept that the Rohingya have a right to citizenship, have a full right to live where they are. And if you look at the map, you will see that the Rakhine state is the state that's bordering on Bangladesh. So when the British left Bangladesh and Myanmar, they drew the border in such a way, using the river, so that the Rohingya ended up in the Myanmar side of the border. If they had drawn the border to the east, the Rohingya would have been in Bangladesh in those early days. So they found themselves in Myanmar. Increasingly, the predominant Buddhist population has discriminated against the Rohingya. They have argued for their political rights, and there has been various incidents of violence involving the Rohingya and the Buddhists. 2012 and again 2016, various incidents of violence. But a major attack took place on the Rohingya in 2017, and that led to more than 700,000 or more than that fleeing across the border into Bangladesh, and you have your 1 million people now in the largest refugee camp in the world outside Cox's Bazar. Now, what should the international community do, and what can the international community do about this? First of all, the principle of national sovereignty means that the first responsibility for any crimes committed is on the government in the country. But what if the government were the ones who committed the crimes? In this case, that is the case. The facts indicate that the Burmese military committed mass crimes against the Rohingya. Are they likely to investigate and prosecute? Are they likely to take the perpetrators to the court in Myanmar? We hope they do. The Burmese government says they will. But the international community has a lot of experience in this type of case, and so they are gradually developing ways and struggling with ways to deal with these types of mass crimes. And what happened in the case of the Rohingya was that after the violations became of a larger scale, the United Nations, I think you've already looked at the way the United Nations is set up. And so there is a body in Geneva called the Human Rights Council, and that is the peak body within the United Nations looking at human rights. So when the violations took place, began to increase in Myanmar, there was a report from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights about those reports. And in March 2017, the Human Rights Council decided it would set up a body called a fact-finding mission. Now, this is not a court. This is a mission from the UN to investigate what happened. Now, the UN Human Rights Council has a membership of a broad range of country members. They voted on this and gave a mandate to the fact-finding mission to investigate what had happened. And that mandate didn't only focus on the Rohingya, which is a good thing, because when we are looking at the violations committed by the Burmese military, if we only focus on these large violations against the Rohingya, it brings up issues that we are just talking trying to defend the Muslim population, whereas in fact attacks have taken place against other ethnic minorities. So the fact-finding mission that was established in March 2017 had a mandate to investigate the violations that had been committed in Rakhine State, which is where the Rohingya live, also the Shan and Kachin states. And those ethnic groups are largely not Muslim, but also mass crimes had been committed against them. So that was the mandate of this UN fact-finding mission. When the UN or anyone else sets up a body like that, it's extremely important that the people in it are very highly respected. Otherwise, they'll just say this is a political exercise set up to persecute us. So the head of that fact-finding mission was Marzuki Darusman, who is an ex-attorney general from Indonesia, a very highly respected lawyer, and he was the head. The other two members were also a former special rapporteur for the UN from Sri Lanka, Radhika Kumaraswamy, and a former member of the Australian Human Rights Commission, Chris Sidoti. So those three people headed up the fact-finding mission, and they did a very deep investigation because at this time, the Burmese said, oh, it's not our fault. We were attacked by extremist groups called ASA. They attacked us and killed a lot of our people, and we responded, but there was nothing like the scale of crimes that we're being accused of. So very important that we have an independent United Nations body looking at this, headed up by people who have a high level of believability, integrity. So they conducted 875 in-depth interviews with the victims and the eyewitnesses in the camps, in other places. They gathered together the aerial photographs, the satellite photographs of the burning of the villages. They collected all the videos they could from people's handphones and others, and they produced a report, an excellent report. So my session today is very small, but I recommend you to have a look at that report. It's one of the best United Nations Commission of Inquiry or fact-finding reports that has been done. And in particular, what they did in that report, which is 400 pages, 444 pages long, that indicates the movement we have in international justice is that they didn't only say what had happened, they named who they thought was most responsible. They named 6 of the senior Burmese generals, and they not only named the head of the Burmese military as being most responsible, they called for his immediate removal from his position. So this is not a court. They haven't tried them, but they were given a mandate to find out the facts. They reported back to the United Nations Human Rights Council. They found, and they made these findings. Now remember, they're not a court, so they can't say that these individuals were guilty of a crime. But they can say that according to their investigation, they found that they were responsible and they should be investigated by a court. They found that crimes against humanity and war crimes and possibly genocide had been committed against in those 3 categories that they had a mandate for: Rakhine State, Shan, and Kachin. They, as I said, they named some of the senior commanders and they called for the head of the Burmese military to be removed from his position. This is a very big step for a United Nations body, and the Myanmar government was very angry, saying you are interfering with our internal affairs, there's not enough evidence, etc. So very important that we had good people involved in that. Now, at the time when they reported back to the UN Security Council, that was in September 2018, not the Security Council, sorry, the Human Rights Council. The Human Rights Council was ready for that report, and they knew, well, this shouldn't be the end of the process when we get those facts, because otherwise that report will just say who's responsible, say what happened. They found that terrible things, that tens of thousands of people had been driven out of their homes, hundreds of thousands driven from their homes, 30,000 houses had been burned, around 10,000 people may have been killed, hundreds of women raped, terrible things that happened. So what should happen then? Is this the end of it? Now, what had happened prior to this was the United Nations had done a similar thing with Syria, the war going on in Syria, with the Syrian government in particular implicated in mass crimes, torture of its own people. So the United Nations had also had a commission of inquiry looking at that. And then when the commission of inquiry was over, they thought, what are we going to do? What they would like to do is for the International Criminal Court to take on this case. And the Human Rights Council recommended to the International Criminal Court, in the case of Myanmar, that they open up a tribunal or an ad hoc tribunal from the Security Council could open up an ad hoc, the Security Council could open up an ad hoc tribunal and the case should be referred from the Security Council to the International Criminal Court. The Security Council has those two options when a country is not a member state of the International Criminal Court. So the Human Rights Council received the report of the fact-finding mission and thought and recommended that the UN Security Council should refer that case to the International Criminal Court. Now, the reason they did that was because Myanmar is not a member of the International Criminal Court, and the International Criminal Court only has a mandate over its own members. So is Bangladesh a member of the International Criminal Court?
Yes,
Shake your head or yes, that's right. Is Myanmar? No.
No, sir.
So we see that the fact-finding mission had collected the information, they'd made those findings. Would that be the end of it? Now the Human Rights Council decided they wanted to do more. So they recommended to the Security Council that they refer the case to the ICC, which they have the power to do, or that they set up an ad hoc tribunal under Chapter 7 of their powers. But they also decided the process of gathering the information shouldn't stop. The fact-finding mission had done a wonderful job, and they decided to establish a permanent body funded by the United Nations to continue to gather the evidence. Why? To gather the evidence and make it into files, case files that would be suitable for prosecution. And then they could pass that on to the International Criminal Court if there's a case in the future, or to other countries which might be opening cases under universal jurisdiction laws. So they decided to set up a body, we're calling it now the IIMM, the International Impartial Mechanism for Myanmar. So we had the fact-finding mission, collecting the evidence, and then at the end of that, well, actually it was still while the mandate was going on, they established the Independent Impartial Mechanism for Myanmar, IIMM. And I will send you some notes on this. I just wanted to explain it first. Now that body is still there in Geneva. They have teams that they want to send to Myanmar. I know the head of that very well. We work together in East Timor. They are a bit restricted by COVID now. They can't send their teams to the Cox's Bazar camps to investigate. So they are collecting the evidence that already has been collected by other organizations. So I know that they are right now dealing with civil society organizations and gathering whatever film, photographs, videos, statements that have been collected by other people And they will be making very careful case files about what happened to the Rohingya, preparing that for future prosecutions. So that mechanism is ongoing. We won't hear so much about it because a lot of their work is done in secret, privately, collecting the evidence. They do have an outreach program, and the head of the IIMM is Nicholas Kumjian, who I worked with. I said he was the senior prosecutor in the war crimes trials in East Timor when I was there. And then he was in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. And he's also been in a number of other places. He's an American former prosecutor. So he's heading up this body. It will continue to gather the evidence that's available about these crimes that have been committed. It's not a court, but it has a mandate to gather that evidence and pass it on to the International Criminal Court or also to any other credible prosecution. So if Myanmar, for example, if Bangladesh set up a credible prosecution using the principles of universal jurisdiction for what happened to the Rohingya, the IIMM may decide to supply the case files to that country to use. So that's still ongoing. So we had the fact-finding mission. It provided its report. It actually provided two reports, the main report and then a follow-up. The follow-up actually even went into the economic interests of those generals who were most responsible and led a push that in this context where we can't find prosecutions of those most responsible, not only should we seek the facts, set up fact-finding missions, but also we should be limiting the economic interests of those who it looks like have committed the crimes. So we had the fact-finding mission set up by the Human Rights Council, and now we have the IIMM also set up by the Human Rights Council, continuing to gather evidence. Now, why couldn't the International Criminal Court open a case against those perpetrators of these mass crimes? You've been studying.
I think, sir, Myanmar is not a part of Rome Statute. This is the reason.
Right. And when the International Criminal Court was set up, they decided that one of the rules is that a country has to join first. Otherwise, the court will not have jurisdiction over it. So more than 125 countries now have joined. Bangladesh has joined. Myanmar has not joined. Therefore, the ICC doesn't have jurisdiction over those crimes committed in Myanmar. The United Nations Security Council, under the UN Charter, it can refer the case of a non-member to the International Criminal Court. So the United Nations Security Council could refer this case to the ICC, but it requires that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council don't veto that decision. And those permanent members are the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, and France. They were named as the 5 permanent members after the Second World War. Now, it's very unlikely. Russia is a friend of Myanmar. China is a friend of Myanmar. It's very unlikely that those permanent members of the Security Council will allow the Security Council to refer and open a case, refer it to the International Criminal Court. So again, we're stuck in terms of getting the perpetrators to justice. The UN has established these facts that found these terrible crimes were committed. 700 to 800,000 people driven over the border into Bangladesh. But Myanmar is not a member. But some very smart international lawyers thought, well, Myanmar is not a member, but there is, the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over 4 major crimes: crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, and aggression. Crimes against humanity, one of the crimes that is a crime against humanity is deportation, the forcible movement of a population across a state border. Now, in the case of the Rohingya, the people were moved from Myanmar to Bangladesh. So did the crime take place in Myanmar, which is not a state party, or in Bangladesh? This was a question they raised. And they said, if some part of that crime continued even 1 meter over the border when the refugees came into Bangladesh, then the crime was committed in Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is a state party to the International Criminal Court. So this crime, and the argument that was put forward is, say if somebody in Myanmar shot a bullet and it hit someone in Bangladesh over the river, does the crime take place where he fired the gun or where the person he shot was hit? In fact, that act is a continuing act. The crime includes the shooting of the gun and the landing of the bullet. And this was a question, a very interesting question for international law. So a request was made to the prosecutor, actually, in the International Criminal Court, asked the judges of the pre-trial chamber, can you make a ruling of law? Is this deportation, does it continue from Myanmar into Bangladesh? Is it a crime that actually took place in Bangladesh? A very interesting question for the International Criminal Court. And they finally came down and decided that yes, this crime of deportation took place for the reasons of the killing, rape, and torture, genocide, and other things that took place in Myanmar and drove the Rohingya into Bangladesh. That crime of driving them into Bangladesh continued when they crossed the border into Bangladesh because they were still being driven. Therefore, the crime was committed also in Bangladesh, and therefore the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over that crime of deportation and the reasons why and the circumstances in which the people were deported. And that's why now they have opened an investigation, which is the first stage of the process in the International Criminal Court. Well, there's a stage before that, the preliminary investigation, which has been finished, passed on now. A successful preliminary investigation has led to the opening of a formal investigation in the International Criminal Court of this crime of deportation. And that's because the court has decided that the deportation continued into Bangladesh, and Bangladesh has ratified the Rome Statute and is a member of the International Criminal Court. So when we look at these mechanisms around the Rohingya case, already we've looked at 3. The UN Human Rights Council setting up the fact-finding mission with a very good report finding that crimes against humanity, war crimes, and possibly genocide were committed. And then they set up the IIMM, which is ongoing, a second mechanism, collecting the evidence of what happened. Now we have a formal investigation, which is taking place in the International Criminal Court, And that means that their investigators and prosecutors are working on this case, compiling the evidence and putting it together for trials of those persons if there's enough evidence to indicate that they've committed these genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, or aggression. And the IIMM, also collecting evidence, has a mandate to pass that over to the International Criminal Court. So they're also working on this. So now we have the fact-finding mission, which is completed, the IIMM, which is continuing, and the International Criminal Court, which is also continuing. But still, the brotherhood and sisterhood of international justice is looking for ways to continue to put pressure on the Myanmar government and the military, not only to seek justice and to seek reparations and solutions for the victims, but to stop the violations because they are continuing in Rakhine State. And then some other lawyers and international lawyers thought about a further way in which they could push and put pressure on the Myanmar government. And they looked at the International Court of Justice. Now, this can be a bit confusing when we think about the ICC, the International Criminal Court. That's the court that tries individuals for crimes they committed. In your criminal courts in Bangladesh, you can't try a company or a government. You can try individuals who have a position in that company or that government. Criminal laws try individuals. It's about individual or group responsibility. The International Criminal Court is looking at those individuals. There's another court called the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, which was set up after the Second World War. It was created by the UN Charter in Article 14 of the UN Charter in 1945. That body, the International Court of Justice, doesn't deal with crimes committed by an individual. The International Court of Justice, if there's one thing to remember, it deals with disputes between states, not whether some person, like a Burmese general, has committed a crime, but whether there's a dispute. Sometimes they decide about a dispute about boundaries in the sea, about maritime boundaries, those type of things, disputes between states. And in this, that part of their mandate, which they have used before, is that when two states have both ratified one of the UN conventions, and one of those two states thinks that the other state has not fulfilled its duties, they can bring the case to the International Court of Justice and ask the court to make a ruling about that. So two states both ratify a UN convention, and one of them says that other country, that state, has not done what it promised to do under this convention, and the court will make a ruling about it. So in this case, Myanmar actually has ratified the United Nations Convention on Genocide. So a country, a small country, the Gambia, African country, in November 2019, Gambia, supported by a whole range of other Muslim countries, brought a case in the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, saying that the violence committed by the government of Myanmar against the Rohingya was a violation of their duties under the Genocide Convention. They said that they've violated the provisions of the convention. They must stop those violations. And Myanmar, they said, under the convention, there's a duty to investigate and prosecute those responsible. So they brought a case in the International Court of Justice saying that Myanmar has, in effect, committed genocide, and asking the court to order, to give an order that this has taken place and that Myanmar must stop and that Myanmar should give reparations to the victims. Now, of course, Myanmar got very angry about this and denied that they were involved. And in fact, when the court opened up its hearings, the person who went to the court to represent Myanmar was Aung San Suu Kyi herself. So she went to the International Court of Justice to deny that the Burmese military had committed these crimes, to deny that the state of Myanmar had committed the genocide. So remember, we had the fact-finding mission, the IIMM continuing to gather evidence. We now have the third one. There's an investigation in the International Criminal Court. And this is a fourth mechanism for the Rohingya case, the International Court of Justice. The court has received that case and they made a ruling, a preliminary ruling on January 23rd. Because they can make such a preliminary ruling, they have not yet decided the fundamental question of whether genocide occurred. That may take some time, it may even take some years. But they have made a decision, and they, after looking at the evidence that was put forward by the Gambia and by Myanmar, they decided that there is a real and imminent risk of irreparable prejudice to the rights of Gambia, so the rights of the victims. So the court decided it could issue what's called provisional measures. So what happens in the ICJ, you ask the court to make these rulings, and it takes a long time because the countries have to give their evidence, the other country responds, it takes years. So they ask them for provisional measures, something in the interim. And this was a big step because the court did decide and issued the provisional measures judgment that said that Myanmar must take steps to stop further genocidal acts by its own forces or by groups of forces acting within Myanmar, of which Myanmar has control, influence. So the court has, they've made a ruling, okay, we're not going to rule yet whether you've committed genocide, but we're going to say you must take steps, not only take steps, you must do something to prevent this from continuing. It also, secondly, the ICJ said that Myanmar must take steps to preserve the evidence of genocide having been committed. And thirdly, they have to submit a report to the court about what they've done. Now this is, as you can see, with Myanmar not a member of the ICC, with its own courts unlikely to take any steps. The international community is constantly struggling to figure out how we can do something to get some form of justice. So in this case, there are actually 5 ways of the international mechanisms. We looked at the fact-finding mission, Marzuki Durusman, Radhika Kumaraswamy and Chris Sidoti and their report. We looked at the IIMM, ongoing. The International Criminal Court now has the investigation opened and will probably lead to trials. We'll wait and see. Now we have the International Court of Justice, a case brought by the Gambia. That court cannot hold individuals to be guilty of crimes. It can only make orders from states, about states, but it can order them to pay or to do things. And they've issued the preliminary findings, not findings, but the preliminary measures that Myanmar must take steps to stop those actions. So if the actions continue, the court can say that Myanmar has not taken those steps and has violated the order of the court. So it's very important. Also, if they find that Myanmar has destroyed evidence, they can say that they violated the order of the court. The court has ordered them to protect the evidence. And Myanmar has filed now its report to say what it's done to the court. So that's the 4 ways. My time is almost up. The last way that the international community is continuing to look for solutions for the Rohingya is on the basis of what we call universal jurisdiction laws. Countries can pass laws in their own country to say, I mean, for example, my country, Australia, has passed those laws, universal jurisdiction, to say if somebody commits genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, those international crimes, even if they commit them in another country against people who are not Australian, if those persons come in our jurisdiction, in our country, we will try them. So some countries around the world now are preparing evidence against individual Myanmar generals, etc., in their own, so that if one of those persons comes into the borders of their country, then they will be arrested and put on trial in that country. When Aung San Suu Kyi arrived in Melbourne, in Australia, a couple of years ago, some lawyers asked the Attorney General of the country to arrest her for the crimes committed against the Rohingya on the basis of the universal jurisdiction laws. This was a big event, of course, in the media. It made people focus on this issue, focus what had happened. In the end, because she was acting as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, there is an exception under the diplomacy laws. And the Attorney General did not proceed with that case. But in the last point I want to make, in Argentina, the country of Argentina, some Rohingya have filed a case, and it's been accepted now, for the Argentinian courts to open a universal jurisdiction case for the crimes committed against the Rohingya in Myanmar. So they're investigating now in Argentina. Now, of course, those persons, they should enter into Argentina in the end if they're going to be tried, but they've already commenced the investigation. So this, I just wanted to give you a general picture today. It can be quite confusing. I will send you some notes so that you can look at it, but I just wanted to go through the story of this, why it's so difficult for us when a country itself is involved in mass crimes against people who are within its borders, especially if it's not a member of the International Criminal Court. In our case, just to sum up, what we saw as mass crimes committed against the Rohingya, particularly in August 2017, when these perhaps 10,000 people were killed, hundreds of women raped, babies burned, 30,000 houses burned, and between 700,000 and 800,000 people had to run away. Terrible crimes. As a result, the UN set up the fact-finding mission, made a report, and that report found these 6 Burmese generals responsible and called for the head of the Burmese military forces for the whole country to step down, to be removed from his post. They also recommended that there be further investigation and prosecution. That's the first thing, the fact-finding mission. The second one was the IIMM, the Independent Impartial Mechanism for Myanmar. Also not a court, but set up to collect the facts and the evidence and put them into case files that are ready for a court to prosecute. Now they can send them to Argentina now, or to Australia. if a country is establishing a prosecution mechanism, if there happens to be one of those persons who's living there, they can use that information. So we have the fact-finding mission, the IIMM. Then we looked at the International Criminal Court, the third one, and we saw that because Myanmar is not a member, it's difficult. But eventually, the court has now found that the crime of deportation from Myanmar to Bangladesh took place also in Bangladesh, and therefore there is an investigation in the International Criminal Court ongoing. Now that means that after they have gathered enough evidence, if it's sufficiently strong, they can indict, charge those individuals who they believe were responsible for committing those crimes. So it may be that the International Criminal Court will, the next steps, big steps that we hear will be the charging of Burmese generals for the crimes committed against the Rohingya. Now, they have the principle of command responsibility in the International Criminal Court, which means if the soldiers are raping and burning and killing, and the general, he may be far away, but if he had a control over them, he knew what they were doing and didn't stop them, generally that means that that person is also responsible. So the International Criminal Court is investigating. It may lead to indictments, to charges, and to trials. The International Criminal Court does not have its own police force. So if they do issue indictments, they won't be parachuting in police into Myanmar to arrest. And this is a weakness. They will be, if that happens, they will be requesting Myanmar to arrest those persons and send them to the court. And if those individuals go to other countries, which are members of the court, they would have an obligation to arrest them also. So that's the third one. The fourth one was the International Court of Justice. We said this is not about individuals, it's about countries, states, disputes between states, and the Gambia, the African country, largely Islamic population, brought this case, supported by the Organization of Islamic States, brought this case in the court and requesting the court to order that Myanmar had failed to protect its people against genocide. The court has now issued provisional measures and said that Myanmar has to take steps to prevent the genocide continuing, to preserve the evidence, and to report on that. And the last one was universal jurisdiction cases being opened in Argentina and being pushed in Australia, some of the European countries also. And this affects the travel of people who may have been involved in these crimes. They can't be sure if they travel somewhere that they won't be arrested. So I know that's quite complex, those 5 things: the fact-finding mission, the IIMM, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, and now the universal jurisdiction cases. So this is one of the most complete examples in the world today of international justice mechanisms. So the case that is taking place, the refugees in your country, in Bangladesh, this is one of the most complete exercises of the international community seeking justice through those 5 steps. So it's very interesting. It's a bit complicated. And as I said, I will send you some notes, but I wanted you to try to engage in the facts of it at this point. So I'll leave it from there. I don't know if you have some questions for me.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It was indeed a very well articulated presentation, and I hope those who are not from the law background has well understood the whole thing for the whole mechanism. So I have two questions in hand from the participants. One is the role of ARSA, actually. So one of the participants was curious to know whether, I mean, what is the role? Let me check the question first. Okay, so is ARSA being used as an internal weapon by the government of Myanmar for the Rohingya displacement? And ARSA issue, is it just a fake or hidden group patronized by the Myanmar government? What do you think of that?
That's a very difficult question, and it's not one which I can actually answer. I think the question represents that the person who asked that question actually understands what's been going on, because there were reports that this group called ARSA, which is seeking a Islamic independent state in Myanmar, had attacked a large number of police stations in 2017, and that's why the military responded, is that they were themselves also being attacked. Now, that's the claim of the Burmese government. There is a counter information on the other side, and also information in the fact-finding mission report indicating that if those attacks did take place, they were relatively small scale, and the attack by the military in response was massively disproportionate to that. Whether this is true or whether it's something created is not something that I can comment on, and I don't think it's something that many people know the definitive answer to. But it's in the human rights field, we don't actually need to look too much at what the whether something is justified or not, because it's not justified. If you attack civilians, it's not justified. Under international law, it cannot be justified. If you rape women, if you attack children, there's no justification for that. So even if it were that they were attacked, they're entitled to make war back against the armed group. The international laws of war allow different armed groups to fight each other and to kill each other. That's not a crime. But if one of those armed groups attacks a civilian, that's a crime. If they rape a woman, that's a crime. If they torture someone, that's a crime. So what we are looking at in terms of justice and rights is that so many of these civilians, women, children, were attacked and violated, and they are massive human rights violations. Whether or not the facts which preceded it included some attacks, I can't comment on. But it seems clear from the evidence that these mass violations against innocent civilians were committed, and they can never be justified. We call it collective punishment. It often happens that in a whole group is punished for actions of a few others. That's also not acceptable under international law. Thanks.
And another question is, I think the participants have got to know about international legal mechanisms, but they are curious to know about the role of CSOs. How can the civil society organizations actually get involved in the international criminal justice system? Because usually they are doing the activism or social movements. But how can they be getting involved in this type of international legal mechanisms or investigations?
There's a lot of ways that CSOs can be involved in international justice and human rights aspects. And my organization, AJAR, Asia Justice and Rights, we are constantly working both at the grassroots level and also at the international level. And it's a very powerful thing to do. And I urge all of you who work for CSOs to to try and look at what can be done internationally, because sometimes at the international level, they lose sight of what's going on the ground. And you know what's happening on the ground. We have a duty to bring that to the international actors as well, so they know. For example, every country that has ratified a convention or a series of conventions must at some point report back to the Geneva-based UN bodies about what they've been doing. So through a period of universal periodic review, the countries report and say, we ratified the Convention on Women and we've done so many great things for women. We've ratified the Convention on Children and we're protecting them everywhere. Governments often make those kind of reports which aren't really true. Civil society has the right to produce shadow reports and send them to the Geneva-based UN bodies to say, our government says they've done this, but actually in these cases, it didn't happen. So that's a very powerful way, is to become involved in writing what we call shadow reports. When your government reports to the UN, civil society can also report. That's one way. The International Criminal Court has a victims unit. They've been to Cox's Bazar. We've been in touch with them. We are trying to link them with the victims. They have a process of linking with civil society organizations, and civil society organizations can be in contact with the International Criminal Court. The IIMM also has a section now dealing with civil society organizations, and I know they have, in the last week, 2 weeks, been contacting some Bangladeshi civil society organizations to ask them, do you have information about the Rohingya? Do you have statements by victims? Can we have them to be part of our files? So that's another way. You can interact with the victims unit of the International Criminal Court. You can interact with the IIMM and contact them. And of course, through our coalitions working together, we can make statements together on particular day, Human Rights Day, days for particular human rights issues. So there are many ways which we can connect with the international mechanisms.
Thank you, Patrick. We're at the end of this lecture. Thank you so much for joining us from a different time zone.
Okay.
I hope you will be coming in Bangladesh very soon once the pandemic is over, hopefully, and we will be working to the camps again like before.
I hope so too, and I miss walking around among you and asking questions and working with you in that way. And this topic today, I just want to say, if you found it a little bit complicated, especially for the non-lawyers, don't worry, it is complicated. It is one of the most complete international justice issues in the world today for the Rohingya. So I will send you some notes. Just remember, there are those 5 ways that we are seeking it. International Criminal Court case has begun. So they are investigating. We might hear but it takes a long time and it will only be a few people. And they are still collecting the evidence. So thanks very much for your attention. I wish you very well. And Naureen is doing a wonderful job with you all. And I hope that this COVID nonsense is over soon and I can come and visit you all in Bangladesh. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.